looking forward to meeting this man. I first got hip to Larry Elder back in 2005 when he financed his own film called Michael and Me. And it was totally going up against Michael Moore and his anti-gun politics. And after that whole Bowling for Columbine thing. And that took some guts. That showed the kind of energy that makes Larry Elder the awesome radio host and commentator that he is. And I'm going to be more than thrilled to meet him for the first time in person on May 9th, an evening with Jamie Allman and Larry Elder coming to View 17 right here at the studios. $79 will get you into the VIP area there where we're going to be able to take some pictures, take a tour of the studio, hang out there. General admission is $13.80, as you can see how cute that is. And you can find out more at theanswerstl.com. But it is going to be a thrill. I'm sure you all have been listening to Larry as I have been here at 1380 1053 The Answer from 5 to 8 in the evening for the Larry Elder Show. And guess who it is on the phone line? None other than the great Larry Elder. How are you, my friend?
Now, Jamie, how am I supposed to live up to that introduction? Not too much pressure.
Buddy, I'm telling you what, I've been a fan of yours for so long, and it's such a privilege to share the stage with you, and will be on the 9th of May. That's a Thursday, to welcome you to St. Louis and to meet you for the first time. It's going to be fun, buddy.
Well, Jamie, I'm looking forward to it, and thank you so much for mentioning Michael and me. The reason I did that is because Michael Moore said that I'll debate any Republican anywhere, anytime on the issue of guns. So he contacted his office right away, and he kind of said he would do something, and then he said he wouldn't, then he said he wouldn't, then he said he wouldn't, then he stopped returning phone calls. And so I decided that I would just do a documentary on the myths about guns, and I confronted Michael Moore when he was out here in California at a book signing. And I asked him 3 times, how many times do Americans use guns to defend themselves? And 3 times he said, there are too many guns in the country. And I said, Michael, my question is, how many times do Americans use a firearm to defend themselves? 3 times, Jamie, he refused to answer. The answer is, according to one researcher named Gary Kleck, who's a professor in Florida, every year Americans use a gun 1.25 million times to defend themselves. Out of that number, 40% believe but for the gun they would have been dead. And what gets me about gun control advocates like Michael Moore is they never even talk about how often guns are used for positive reasons. Guns have assets. Guns have liabilities. Guns have benefits. Guns have costs. One of the costs, of course, is that guns are sometimes used criminally, illegally, accidentally. People get hurt. But the other part is how often do Americans use guns to defend themselves? And if you take those numbers that Kleck gave, Americans far more often use guns for good purposes than bad purposes. So for any rational discussion, that other part of the equation needs to be mentioned.
No doubt about it. And, you know, I kind of talked a little bit about this yesterday in the wake of the continuing ongoing murders that we're seeing in Chicago and what defines a mass shooting and a mass this and a mass that. And I pointed out how interesting it is that when it comes to the left, as particularly white liberals, but also black leaders as well on the left side, but it is instead of they never will address the pathologies surrounding what is causing crime. I said you go to there's a website called HeyJackass.com, which basically lays out the murders and the time clocks and everything else there in Chicago. And I said you go to that website, you can literally narrow down to 3 distinct neighborhoods in Chicago where this is happening. And yet nothing is being done to address the pathology surrounding these issues. Instead, they want to take the gun away from you in St. Louis because they think that's going to help the crime problem. And they never address the true reasons why we're seeing gun violence and gun crimes.
You're absolutely right. And you look at Chicago, all this left-wing firepower. You got Rahm Emanuel there. Bill Ayers is there. Louis Farrakhan is there. Obama has adopted Chicago as his hometown. Jesse Jackson is there. Why haven't all these really bright people put their heads together and made Chicago a shining city on a hill? And you're right. It's just a few neighborhoods in Chicago where most of this violence takes place. And Chicago is a third black, a third white, and a third Hispanic. Yet 70% of the homicides are black on black. And the primary reason for this is the breakdown of the family. Obama once said, a kid raised without a father, is 5 times more likely to be poor, 9 times more likely to drop out of school, 20 times more likely to end up in jail. And it turns out 70% of black kids today are born outside of wedlock. It is far and away the number one problem in the country. But rather than deal with that, it's all about the presence of guns or racism. Racism. That's what the so-called black leaders and white leaders constantly tell you, as opposed to analyzing whether or not the welfare state has incentivized women to marry the government and allowed men to abandon their financial and moral responsibility.
And unfortunately, for a lot of these young black males in Chicago, and we have the same problem here in areas of St. Louis as well. But unfortunately, to get any attention at all, I've started to create a list of things you must be to have any attention paid to you if you are a young black male. You must die in a theater, in a church, or in some kind of mass shooting, or you have to be killed not just by a police officer. You have to be killed by a white police officer for anybody to care about your life. Otherwise, they just look the other way. I mean, we have what would designate a mass shooting every weekend in Chicago, and yet that's never paid it. Because if you're that poor young black man who's on the street corner on the south side of Chicago and you get shot, there's nobody caring about you because you don't fall into that special class of a victim. And yet we could easily address this through our developing economies and further stakeholding in our economies. And as you point out, encouraging the father-filled families, that kind of thing. But boy, I just find that the list grows, let me tell you.
I remember the Washington Post a couple of years ago, Jamie, put out a study of the 1,000 or so people who were killed by cops that year. There were about 16 or 17 unarmed black men who were killed by white cops. Now, unarmed, of course, does not mean not dangerous. Michael Brown was unarmed, but they found his DNA on the officer's gun. But there were 16 or 17 unarmed black men killed by the police. There were more unarmed white men killed by the police. I doubt that very many people in your audience could even name one. Last year, about 6,000 blacks killed other blacks. And as you pointed out, when that happens, nobody says anything. You let a white cop kill a black person, in comes Van Jones, in comes Anderson Cooper, in comes Chris Cuomo, and then we get this lecture on institutional, systemic, or structural racism in America, and it's nonsense.
Yeah, it's so funny, too, and I love much of your writing and much of your commentating and much of the content of your books have always been, I love the fact that you understand and respect the intelligence of normal, average, everyday people, and you rely on that when you talk to us and when you talk to people, which I love about how you approach things. And I'll give you an example of that. You could see how common sense, normal, average, everyday people are. You just mentioned Michael Brown. You realize his mother, who was part of the burn it down crowd there in the wake of the grand jury ruling, ran for city council in Ferguson. The election was last night. She came in third. So wow. so people, and so people have their fill. I mean, they people out there know how to discern what's real and what's not real, and what's common sense and what's not. So that was proved last night in Ferguson.
That's right. And I remember when the DOJ came in and did their study on Ferguson and concluded the Ferguson Police Department to be institutionally racist. And here's their primary takeaway. Ferguson was 57% black, but of the traffic stops, 85% of them were black people. Therefore, an 18-point gap, ergo institutional racism. However, look at New York City, which is a police department where the average cop is a person of color or a woman. 25% of black people live in the city is 25% black. 55% of the traffic stops are of black people. That's a 30-point gap in a police department that is racially diverse. How come the NYPD isn't more institutionally racist than Ferguson? And the answer is you have to look at behavior. You have to look at driving patterns. When you look at driving patterns, this racist nonsense goes away. It turns out, according to one study that was done by the DOJ, a black motorist was more likely to speed, more likely to violate traffic offenses, more likely to drive without a seatbelt, more likely to drive with a busted tailpipe. You add all that together, and the analysis of institutional racism goes away.
And you know what? The other part of that study found too, Larry, is that if you were white and you had an outstanding warrant, you were more likely to be taken off to jail than if you were black with an outstanding warrant. So that was really a weird result of that. Now, earlier you mentioned, too, the fatherless family and the important role of fathers. And one of the most compelling elements of your life story and of your relationships is your relationship with your father, which is a storied one, and one that I think we'll delve more deeply into when you're here on May 9th. But that really is, that story, every time I even look at the Dear Father, Dear Son, 2 Lives, 8 Hours, and every time I think about that story you tell about your father and your relationship with him, I get goosebumps, man, because my father and I were very close. And he died when I was very young, though, but it just gives me goosebumps to hear that story from you.
Well, as you know, my father is no longer with us, but my father was kicked out of the house when he was 13 years old by his irresponsible mother. He never knew his biological father. So this is a black boy, Jim Crow South, at the beginning of the Great Depression in Athens, Georgia, literally being thrown out of his house, never to return. I defy your listeners to find very many people who had a hand dealt like that. My father picked up the cards, did his best, ultimately started a small little cafe. And my father always told my brothers and me the following: hard work wins. You get out of life what you put into it. You cannot control the outcome, but you are 100% in control of the effort. And before you whine about what somebody did to you or said to you, go to the nearest mirror, look at it, and say, what could I have done to change the outcome? And then my dad said this: finally, no matter how good you are, how hard you work, how ethical you are, sooner or later, bad things will happen. How you respond to those bad things will tell your mother and me whether or not we raised a man. This is the guy who had every reason to be angry, and the so-called black leaders are angrier than my father was today. It's insane. These people, you see on TV, on cable, on CNN, they're all young, good-looking, well-dressed, very successful, all went to college, all worked hard, telling other young black people, you can't do what I did because racism holds you back. It's nonsense. They are not preaching what they're practicing. What they practice is hard work. What they preach is you're a victim. And it's insulting, and it's harmful to the country.
Well, I'll tell you, I love that line about the outcome, but you are in control of 100% of the effort. That is a beautiful thing to say, my friend, and just another example of the kinds of things that we're going to be hearing, as you hear every night, 5 to 8 on 1380 105.3 The Answer. But on May 9th, Larry is coming into town, and we're going to roll out the red carpet, and it's an evening with Jamie Allman and Larry Elder. Thursday, May the 9th. You can get your tickets at theanswerstl.com, $79 for the VIP and the $13.80 for the general admission. And the VIP gets you a tour of the studio. We just kind of hang out. But either way, it's going to be a fun night. Even if it's general admission, don't worry. It's going to be a great night with Larry. I look forward to meeting you in person and thanking you in person for all of the great illumination that you've given us throughout the years in your career and everything else. So I look forward to meeting you, Larry.
Jamie, looking forward to it. See you soon.
Okay, sounds good. Safe travels here, and that's May 9th. That's a Thursday evening, and the View 17 is a beautiful place, beautiful venue, and we're going to have a great time. I love that dude, man. He's really good. And you know what? What's great about it is it's that kind of information that makes you happy, not sad. Makes you happy, not angry. You know, because it's so commonsensical, it's so easy, the approach is so simple, and all you have to do is make sure you stand your ground and stay in the game and refute these other people out there. And actually, he did that beautifully with this self-financed film, Michael and Me. I think it's great. I need to take a look back at it because I remember when it came out, and it was really something. So check it out, theanswerstl.com, an evening with Jamie Allman and Larry Elder, Thursday, the 9th of May, theanswerstl.com.